What is going on, everybody? Welcome into the reveal of the number 16 team in my 2021 NFL Power Rankings with a deep dive into the Arizona Cardinals, and that is going to take us into the top half of the league and also now climbing into a new tier gap in my rankings as we go from teams that are certainly playoff hopefuls, but not teams that I'd necessarily be surprised or disappointed in if they did not make it, to now the Arizona Cardinals. And all of these next teams are teams that have legitimate playoff expectations to the point that they would be a disappointment in the eyes of myself and most members of the media if they did not make the playoffs. So with that, huge expectations heading into year 3 now with Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray, especially for Cliff Kingsbury there, I would say on the hot seat. Was supposed to come in with this, air raid offense and, change the NFL and have this explosive passing game, and it just hasn't been there. So not just a lot to prove as far as the X's and O's go and developing the scheme, but also from a leadership point of view for Cliff Kingsbury. I would just say the culture here in Arizona, that kind of team chemistry has really been lacking since Cliff Kingsbury got here. So a big year for Cliff Kingsbury, heavy expectations. It is going to be an awesome deep dive. I can't wait to hop in. Before we get started, please do hit that like button down below to show your support. Also, if you enjoy, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. You're not going to want to miss an upload as we count down to the number 1 team in my power rankings, and we are closing in on 60,000 subs here on That Franchise Guy. So thank you everybody for your support this series, and really this year has been amazing, and I can't wait to see how far we can go throughout the rest of this year. Let's go ahead and get started, and we are going to start with the off season here for Arizona. We mentioned those high expectations, and a big part of that is kind of being those off-season warriors that we're becoming to get to know the Arizona Cardinals to be, with Steve Keim, who's very much a go-and-get-it type of general manager, a very aggressive style, and that showed again this offseason. One of the teams that, you see those articles every summer, who won the offseason? Well, the Arizona Cardinals find themselves in that conversation again, as the key departures here really minimal, right? You lose your starting running back, Kenyon Drake, whatever, it's a running back. You lose Dan Arnold, decent little receiving option in the tight end position there as a flex guy, but, replaceable. Larry Fitzgerald, I've actually been kind of against the grain on Larry. Yeah, first ballot Hall of Famer, and I love him, one of the more underrated receivers of all time, but I actually think in a lot of ways, he has held this team back with his lack of explosiveness, kind of taking up space in that slot receiver position group where they have a Christian Kirk that could be there, and they bring in a Rondale Moore. They could certainly get a lot of juice there. They run a lot of bubble screens as well. I just don't think throwing bubble screens to Larry Fitzgerald in 2021 is going to be a great way for this offense to take that next step. So yeah, you're going to miss the leadership there, but maybe some addition by subtraction with Larry Fitzgerald. You lose Hassan Reddick, but they're good with that edge group. Chandler Jones coming back from injury, they'll be just fine there. Patrick Peterson, down year. He probably would be better than he was last year if he came back, but not a huge loss for this team based on how he played last season. And then you go to the key additions. This team's been busy, man. James Conner comes in. Another running back to contribute there. They do sign A.J. Green, which is, Larry Fitzgerald-esque at this stage in his career. Still a different skill set. They hope that maybe he was just banged up last year and can get back to speed. But a cheap one-year deal. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. I just hope they don't force him onto the field if he is as bad as he was last year. We'll talk more about all these guys, but Rondale Moore, kind of the opposite. Young, explosive playmaker, 5'7". I'm super excited about Rondale Moore. We'll talk about him and Rodney Hudson. To me, the best thing that this team did this offseason was acquiring Rodney Hudson for a 3rd-round pick. What a steal that is. He's going to do so much for this offensive line. And then they bring in J.J. Watt as well. So the trench play here that was really bad for this team last year, getting massive improvements with Hudson, J.J. Watt, and Chandler Jones I'm marking as an addition because he only played 4 games last season. They go Zaven Collins as well to add some more size to the front 7. And then A couple additions in the secondary. Malcolm Butler, who still was not bad for the Titans last year. Robert Alford, a forgotten man here who has not played since 2018, but a relevant player here who is expected to start if he can stay healthy. And then they also add Darqueze Dennard to add some flexibility to the slot cornerback room. So Steve Keim has been busy here, a ton of moving pieces, and that is the beauty of this deep dive series, is we're going to go through position by position and not just rank each group as they stack up against the rest of the league, but talk about how these different pieces can get put into this scheme and how I expect them to perform this year. So let's get into it, starting with the quarterback grade, where they're going to come in 10th in the league for 2021. And you mentioned the hype and expectations for this team. Well, the core of that is Kyler Murray and his upside and the excitement that he brings to this team. There's so much to like in Kyler Murray's game. He's one of the most fun players to watch in the league. Certainly one of my favorite players in the NFL. You'll see that framed jersey hanging up in the studio behind me. But you want to talk about traits. What does Kyler Murray not have? I mean, he has an exceptional arm, maybe not the quote-unquote strongest arm in the league, but just arm talent and that natural see ball, hit ball arm, that ability to put the ball wherever he wants, whenever he wants. Kyler's got it. He's got downfield accuracy. It's often Russell Wilson-esque with his ability to kind of drop that ball in there deep down the field, outside the numbers. It is a thing of beauty. And then you talk about what he brings to the table with his feet in two aspects of the game. You have the designed run game that has really been special here. You know, sometimes a quarterback, having that designed run game, it becomes the offense. And you look at like Cam Newton sometimes and Lamar Jackson. They almost focus so much on that designed run game that it overtakes the offense and kind of limits the ceiling of the offense in a lot of ways. And I don't really see that with the way they've schemed this up here. I think they've been very creative, but Kyler is right there with those guys as an elite designed run quarterback. And it opens things up in so many ways by adding numbers advantages. And when he does keep it, he is so freaking fast and quick and explosive and elusive and you name it. He's got to be one of the three best running quarterbacks in the history of the NFL just from the eye test. So he brings that aspect to this team. Because it's not like they have this great offensive line or these great running backs, but they do have a pretty good running game here in Arizona. But beyond that, I'm going to make the argument that Kyler Murray is the best scrambling quarterback in the NFL. Yes, ahead of Lamar Jackson. Now, pound for pound, like Lamar, when he scrambles, and it's the right decision to do it, he's probably a little bit faster, a little bit more explosive, but that gap's pretty marginal as far as who's better with the ball in their hands. I think you're taking Lamar over Kyler. But one thing Kyler has that I would say Lamar Jackson does not is something we talk about a ton in this series, and that is that natural feel in that pocket. Not just the ability to sense pressure, but the ability to know when and how to use their feet to extend plays. I would say Lamar certainly can sense pressure and certainly knows how to escape the pocket, but he's almost a little bit fidgety, a little bit trigger happy with his feet, whereas Kyler, I think, is much more composed in the pocket, which I believe makes him a much more lethal scrambler. Because he does it when he's going to get a huge chunk play out of it. Now, of course, Lamar will get chunk plays. He's Lamar freaking Jackson. But just the consistency aspect of it, Kyler has such a natural feel with when and how to use his feet. So there's just so much to like in Kyler Murray's game. And when you want to talk about the processing, the decision-making, it's fine. He's a young quarterback. And I think he's got room to grow in that department, but it's not like he can't read a defense or makes a bunch of terrible decisions. So that all sounds amazing, right? Where are the weaknesses? Why is he not a top 5 quarterback? He does have, I would say, one resounding weakness in his game, and that is the ability to attack the middle of the field, where he really struggles. If you look just at any efficiency metric or a shot map or just watch him play, you can tell he's not comfortable with the middle of the field. And it's both the processing and knowing when to attack the middle of the field, but also the accuracy over the middle of the field is not pretty either. And it's almost impossible not to attribute that to his height. At 5'9" on a good day. And if you just think about it logistically speaking, in the NFL, if you're trying to attack the middle of the field, you have bigger, faster, smarter defenses than anything Kyler saw in college. And to have these guys changing lanes and passing off defenders at mesh points and changing levels really well, you got to deal with the Fred Warners and Bobby Wagners in this division. To really see and comprehend that part of the field well, it does help to be 6'3", 6'4". When you drop back, you can see all that play out. I don't think Kyler necessarily can't see the middle of the field, but I do firmly believe that with how quickly things move and how fast these guys are, I do think there's times where there's throwing lanes that are there that Kyler just isn't seeing or processing quick enough. And you see a lack of confidence and accuracy attacking that part of the field as well. And with his height, you might stop and say, is that just a area of the field, a part of his game that's always going to be a knock? And I think that very realistically could be the case. I think there's also a world where that part of the field speeds up and he starts to understand what defenses are doing, and he's much more confident attacking that middle of the field. And that's such a huge area to watch for Kyler this year. So we'll see. But if that is a knock on him, I think that could keep him out of the elite echelon of quarterbacks. And maybe it's somewhere in between where, it's always a weakness, but he can show some development there. That's probably what I expect from Kyler Murray. And that's where you come in maybe really close to where like Russell Wilson is right now as a top 5 quarterback, but maybe just a couple holes in his game that keep him out of the Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes conversation. So as you're watching Kyler Murray this year, really dial into the middle of the field and see kind of what's going on there. And another kind of deep dive into this deep dive is something I've talked about, but I want to hit on it here. And it's, when the Cardinals took Kyler Murray with Cliff Kingsbury coming in, there was, it was this match made in heaven. It was this perfect marriage between scheme and scheme fit. And when you really think about what Cliff Kingsbury's offense is the air raid offense coming into the NFL. Well, the air raid offense, the core concept of the air raid is mesh, right? Anyone that's played Madden, mesh. You got the double crossers, you got some kind of deep out or a deep post, and then you have the core, the critical part of this is either a deep dig or a hitch route that sits on top of that double crossing route. And the reason that's so important is because these linebackers have to come up to pass off and defend the mesh there, the double crossers, who also can sit down in those soft spots in the zone. And then you can drop in that deep dig or you can drop in that hitch route over it. So you have literally the mesh points of the defense where you have linebackers passing off receivers and receivers seeing things and sitting down and trying to attack that second level of the defense behind those linebackers. That is what Cliff Kingsbury's offense is literally built around. It's like outside zone in San Francisco for Cliff Kingsbury in this offense. And what we just talked about with Kyler Murray, he ran that stuff at Oklahoma, but this is the NFL. Things are a lot tighter in the NFL, and I think we're seeing him not process that concept quite as well as maybe it was expected. And we're seeing Cliff have to adjust. And it's just another thing to keep an eye on here is, do they run a lot of mesh? And if they do, how does Kyler Murray handle it? And if they get away from mesh and start having success in other ways, I think that's a huge credit to Cliff Kingsbury for for changing and adapting his scheme. So that's a lot about Kyler Murray. That's where I'm at right now. I think there's a big tier of quarterbacks like 7 to 12 right now, and I think he's in there. And I do think he gives this team a nice floor. But if he really works on attacking the middle of the field and shows continued development in his processing and decision making that every young quarterback you hope takes steps year to year, I do think Kyler Murray finds himself in the top 5 conversation in the MVP consideration. The Cardinals should be a playoff team and maybe even more than that. So heavy expectations for Kyler Murray. I do want to just end here by shouting out Yarrow Bedwin on Twitter had a phenomenal suggestion for this series that I'm going to go ahead and implement right now. You're going to see that little green up arrow right there. Well, I've talked about a lot in this series about guys that, I can't give everybody the benefit of the doubt, right? And I can't just assume Kyler becomes a top 5 quarterback, even though I think he has a good chance to do it. So just putting that little up arrow, it's for guys that I frankly expect to exceed my ranking of them right here, right now, as the season goes on. So just keep an eye out for that little green up arrow. Those are guys that I truly believe have like breakout seasons ahead of them. Just a little note there and a great suggestion for the series, and I appreciate it. It's also not insignificant that they brought in Colt McCoy here. Kyler with the running style. I don't see them taking a step back with all these design runs. He is a more slender player. So to have a backup that, if Kyler hurts his hip one game or hurts his ankle another game, you have a backup that can step in for a quarter here, a quarter there, keep the team afloat, and much better than what they had last year, and could actually help them in a tight division. If he had a couple big moments throughout the season where he helps them win a game or two, I really wouldn't be that surprised. So I think that was a smart signing. We don't talk a lot about backup quarterbacks, but I think this is a team where that's really applicable. So 10th at quarterback. Let's move on to the running back room. And this team is barely invested in this group, so I'm not going to invest a lot of time reflecting back at that. They're going to rank tied for 28th in the NFL. I love, though, what Kyler Murray's ability as a runner does to kind of elevate these guys, because it just adds that numbers advantage to help the run game. So when you have a quarterback like Kyler and you use him well in the run game, you don't have to spend that money at running back. You can let a Kenyon Drake go, and not even worry about it. Like, no one's going to miss Kenyon Drake here. They have Chase Edmonds, who's perfectly fine. Not a feature back, not a bruiser or anything, but perfect scheme fit, comfortable running the ball out of shotgun, good receiving back as well. And you have a nice complementary piece there in James Conner. Makes a ton of sense why they signed him. They didn't have that power aspect here. Even with Kenyon Drake last year, they don't have that guy to just get you a yard on 3rd and 1. They don't have much of a physical presence, or at least they didn't last year. So you get James Conner, you add a Rodney Hudson, who we'll talk about, a J.J. Watt. They're adding a little bit more of a physicality element that this Big 12 offense has lacked, and I like the signing. I think James Conner could be, I don't know exactly where he's going in like fantasy drafts. He could be a sneaky pickup, a guy that gets 8 to 10 touchdowns that you can kind of plug in and have some good moments there. So going to be a split. Eno Benjamin's a good reserve there for if anything happened to Chase Edmonds. It's more of that scat back style. And then really not really worth mentioning the other guys. Khalfani Muhammad's got some speed, but he's never been able to turn that into anything in the NFL, and he's been around for a while. So tied for 28th at running back. He'll be just fine. And let's move on. The receiving room here, I think this is going to rank a little bit lower than people expect, coming in 17th in the league, and it's certainly good, very good receiving room. There's a lot of really good receiving groups in the NFL. But I think I weight having versatility and depth, not even so much depth, but just multiple quality starters than I think other people maybe do. And as much as DeAndre Hopkins brings to the table, I think there's other question marks around here. Now, again, it's not a bad receiving room. They come in 17th, but I think some people maybe expected this to be more of a top 10 group of receivers, and I don't necessarily see it that way because I think you do have some question marks after DeAndre Hopkins. But you do have DeAndre Hopkins, the single reason that this is a top 20 receiving group, still in the conversation for the best wide receiver in the NFL. His separation ability, his ability to just beat man coverage, it's not at the same level as a Adams or a Diggs or a Tyreek Hill, but his ball skills are still the best in the league. Such a reliable target, and it's not that he doesn't win one-on-one. He's just not at that absolute top level. So you love what you have in DeAndre Hopkins, of course. What a steal bringing him in. But this is more about who else can step up here for me, because they really were leaning a lot on Hopkins to carry the load here. And they bring in A.J. Green, who they hope can be a number 2 here. And I don't know if he can. He was one of the worst separators in the NFL last year. He looked slow as hell. Frankly, Joe Burrow threw an interception where he was trusting A.J. Green to go make a play against the Ravens. against a zero blitz. And AJ Green just gave up on the play. He wasn't in it. And AJ Green's been one of my favorite receivers throughout the last decade. I think he's actually an underrated player, but I do lean on the side of him being washed up. I hope that he can rekindle the flame and get back to at least being a quality secondary option here, but I just don't see that happening. I think he actually gets phased out and can maybe even hold this offense back a little bit early on, because you have some other options here with a lot more separation ability. I really hope I'm wrong, but that's my honest projection of the AJ Green situation. You have Christian Kirk, who I want to finally see him play some damn slot receiver. They've been forcing him to be a perimeter receiver, and it's stupid, man. That's not his skill set. He's not a guy with great release. He has speed, but he's not a great guy at separating deep, right? You still have to have that ability to kind of fight through contact and get deep. You can't just have speed. Case in point, Andy Isabella here. So he's finally going to play in the slot where he can use, he's 200 pounds at 5'10". He's almost built like a running back. So put him in the slot, Cliff Kingsbury. Contract year. I still believe in Christian Kirk, but the way they've used him is just not synced up with his skill set. So that's frustrating. And then they bring in Rondale Moore as well. So Moore is also that kind of slot playmaking type. Now, I think there's room for both Kirk and Moore to be starting slot receivers in this offense. So I don't think they're necessarily going to conflict with each other that much. But yeah, I think both these guys are what this receiving room is all about, on if it can be a top 10 group. Because they have the speed, they have the explosiveness, they're great scheme fits for the horizontal air raid offense where you run bubble screens and slant flats and all that stuff. So just gotta see it from Christian Kirk, hopefully getting utilized in the correct way now with Larry Fitzgerald gone as a slot receiver, and Rondale Moore. I kind of glossed over him, but he was one of my favorite prospects in this class. Some of the best run after the catch ability you'll ever see. It really is Tyreek Hill-esque when he has the ball in his hands. He doesn't quite have the high-end speed that Tyreek Hill has, but he still has legit 4.3 speed. And Purdue, as kind of a, let's just say Purdue, they weren't really able to unlock him as a deep threat, and he is 5'7". But I still think Rondale Moore can get open, especially if you get him going on deep crossers and stuff. I think he can be a threat if schemed up correctly there. And he has ball skills. So the sky's the limit for Rondale Moore, which is tough to say for a 5'7" receiver. But I think he can be kind of a cross between a T.Y. Hilton and a Tyreek Hill there. It just depends on how well they can use him and how well he develops. But I really believe in Rondale Moore. He's a high character guy and a freak athlete. With a ton of work ethic. So I think Rondale Moore works out here. I got him in a dynasty league, and I couldn't be more excited about it. But again, we need to see it from the young rookie who barely produced in college. Also keep an eye on Rondale Moore as a running back here. I think we see a ton of that and some creativity in that way as well. So I love that pick a ton. And then behind him, it's not that exciting. Andy Isabella, I'm kind of ready to give up on. I just don't think he has it. He can't track the ball, really, is what it comes down to, and he has no strength as a receiver. And honestly, he ran a 4.3, but I don't see that speed on tape. So I hope he proves me wrong, but I just don't have expectations. I think he is leaning towards being a bust and a why the hell did we not take DK Metcalf here pick. But then you have Keyshawn Johnson. Also here, he's been the best receiver from that class with Isabella and the tree out of Iowa State that they drafted. But yeah, he's just a balanced possession guy. He's a nice, if AJ Green gets hurt or just stinks, he can be more of that perimeter depth piece there. He's fine. Nice depth. And then really not even worth talking about the rest of these guys. I think there'll be a competition, but I don't even know if they'll keep 7 receivers here. The tight end group here is one of the worst in the league. Now, I do like Max Williams, and now kind of getting that full opportunity to be the full-time starter. I'm excited to watch him. He's a really tenacious player. He's a great run blocker and really good with the ball in his hands. Kind of sneaky speed and can get open as well. So he's a good-ish tight end. Just hasn't been able to stay healthy throughout his career. Then you add in Darrell Daniels, another intriguing guy. He's got thickness and speed. He's only 6'3". but he is in the right offense that uses those tight ends, just like we saw from Dan Arnold, is more of a flex slot receiver in a lot of ways. So he has an opportunity in this offense to kind of make a name for himself. Keep an eye on Darrell Daniels. You got Ross Travis, basketball profile here. Kerry Angeline, undrafted pickup. Ian Bunting. It's just not a particularly good tight end room, but they don't lean on that group very much. They like to go 4 wide here with that air raid background. Then the running back room, it's solid with Chase Edmonds. He's a very good receiving back. He's a good route runner out of the backfield. Decent hands. He's good with the ball in space. Very little to criticize of Chase Edmonds in the receiving game. So he contributes here. But behind him, James Conner can catch the ball and make some guys miss, but just not a ultra explosive player. You got Eno Benjamin. Could be a threat if he gets the opportunity, and then not much after that. So again, the receiving grade ranking 17th. And it's kind of wait and see from Kirk and Rondale Moore, a lot really leaning on them to step up. And that's if you take the same stance as me on AJ Green, where it's just really hard to expect him to fulfill the money that they gave him here based on what we saw last year and his age. Then we get to the offensive line. Sneaky good offensive line here, ranking 13th in the NFL. The tackle duo alone, I think, is underrated. You have DJ Humphries, who is right there now with Garrett Bowles and some of these other tackles we've talked about that have really broken out at year 4, year 5, former first-round picks. And DJ Humphries is right there, especially as a run blocker. He's really channeling that get-off and athleticism that he had to thrive there, but he's consistently developed that technique to the point where he is a solid left tackle, and he's getting paid a ton of money, and it's great to see him live up to that. So that was big for this team to have him kind of emerge last year. And then you have Kelvin Beachum at right tackle, one of the more underrated players in the entire NFL. I thought it was head-scratching when the Jets let him go. He's a weird body type. He's 6'3". He's like all legs. Like if you watch the next Cardinals game you watch, just look at him. What the heck? Like he's a refrigerator that looks like his legs start at about his abs. It's crazy. But he is a technician of a pass blocker. Now, he's not a very good athlete, and that weird size, for whatever reason, just doesn't make him much of a run blocker from a get-off and run-blocking power perspective. But he is a technician, and he has been nothing but a high-end pass protector for years, and it was no different last year. So he is awesome. And, hey, it's a plus to have a 6'3" right tackle there when Kyler Murray's your quarterback. The shorter you can make these offensive linemen, the better here in Arizona. So I think he's going to stick around here and maybe even get a surprisingly large contract. I don't know when he's up, but such a great pickup there by Steve Keim. An underrated move, an underrated player all around. And then Rodney Hudson for a third-round pick. What the hell? Thanks, Gruden, for that one. I still think Rodney Hudson has a chance to be the best pass-blocking center in the NFL this year. He's never been like an elite run blocker, but he's more than good enough there. So you have just, frankly, a dominant trio there to kind of build around, which is really good. Now, the interior, you had some questions. Justin Pugh is still a very good pass protector and, on the back nine of his career, but he's been a very stable, solid pro, and you're seeing him play better now that this Cardinals offensive line is getting better. The right guard is going to be a question mark, though I like the Brian Winters pickup. He's a tough dude and has been on some rough offensive lines there with the Jets where he kind of seems to have lost it a little bit. The Bills picked him up last year. He didn't get to see the field a whole lot, but I still think he could kind of have a bounce-back year this year, and if he can get back to being a quality starter at guard, this can be a top 10 offensive line and really be a strength of this team. But he's not even a lock to win that right guard spot. You have Justin Murray, who's kind of been a decent starter for this team for the last 2 years. If Winters isn't good, I'm perfectly fine with Murray at right guard, and Murray's kind of the ultimate swingman who can play tackle, can play guard. And then you also got to keep an eye on Josh Jones, a guy that a lot of people thought was a steal in the third round, someone that could have been a first-round pick. With the size, he could play guard or tackle. So definitely someone to keep an eye on there, Josh Jones. Probably not going to win a tackle job here, but maybe could compete at right guard or just provide quality depth at tackle. You got Max Garcia, is a good veteran, may or may not make the team because you have two decent center prospects in Lamont Gaillard, who's a mauling run blocker working on his pass protection technique, and Michael Menet, who just kind of needs to add some size and physicality, but a decent prospect there in the 7th round coming out of Penn State. So I think some people might be surprised with the 13th ranked offensive line here, but honestly, that might be their floor. This is a very underrated offensive line, and adding Rodney Hudson here, I think this is going to be one of the better pass-protecting offensive lines in the entire league. And another thing I didn't even mention is what Rodney Hudson's going to bring to the table from a leadership standpoint. They haven't really had that alpha guy on this offensive line, that captain, but also just the ability for him to recognize stunts and take that kind of off of Kyler Murray's plate a little bit is going to be huge for this team as well. So I can't speak highly enough about that trade. I think that the acquisition of Rodney Hudson is one of the best moves that any championship contender made this entire offseason, and that's up there with, the Julio Jones trade, for example. So 13th at offensive line. So all of this is going to spit out a top half offense for me, the 14th ranked offense, but this is actually going to get dragged down a little bit by my ranking of their offensive coaching, where they're going to come in 18th in the league. I think Cliff, he's an offensive mind. I don't think he's terrible, but I think there's a lot of areas as well that they just leave a lot to be desired. I think some of their passing concepts and just the way they use DeAndre Hopkins, it's pretty stale. And now I think he's balancing a lot of the stuff we talked about with Kyler struggling over the middle of the field, and it's not all on Cliff Kingsbury. So that's, they're ranked 18th. That's a solid grade. But, it's not like we're talking about Brian Dable here or Andy Reid or even like Matt LaFleur, Sean McVay. Like, there's some really creative offensive play callers in the league, and I'm just not convinced yet that Cliff Kingsbury is that dude. So it hurts them a little bit, but 14th on offense and more than plenty potential to get into the top 10 and beyond. This could be the best offense in the NFL. It really has that type of ceiling, but they're just young and have a lot to prove. So 14th for now. And you talk about having a lot to prove, well, that's really this defense in a nutshell. Talent is not the problem for the Arizona Cardinals. It is coaching and scheme and getting these guys in the right place and really having some sort of plan and cohesiveness on this defense that really just hasn't been here with Vance Joseph, and I have my question marks. So let's go ahead and go through unit by unit. The run defense here just is not good. They have kind of made an approach to get back to physicality, bringing in a J.J. Watt, who not just on the field as a player they hope can contribute here, but also from a leadership standpoint. But, man, this was one of the softest front sevens in the entire NFL last year, and I'm not convinced that they did enough to do that, to really take massive steps up, I should say. So really your interior defensive line, where the run defense starts, it's not very good. Yes, you have J.J. Watt, who we mentioned, and that helps, and you hope that can elevate this thing. But you got Leki Fotu, who should be better in year two than he was as a rookie. It was just a tough year for young defensive tackles, and I do see him as a guy that can be a quality, run-stopping, nose tackle type. Is it going to be in year two? I have no idea. You have Zach Allen as kind of the other 3-4 defensive end here. I'm excited to see Zach Allen get with J.J. Watt because I was sold on Zach Allen as a back end of the first round talent in that draft, and I thought that some of the stuff he talked about and how he wants to play at the next level was J.J. Watt-esque. Now, he has not shown the same ability to take care of his body. In fact, I think Zach Allen looks a little bit out of shape, which is a surprise based on what his pre-draft kind of scouting report was. But part of that is I think they're asking him to put on weight to play that true 3-4 defensive end role, whereas I see him, or saw him rather, as a prospect as a 4-3 edge fit in that kind of Michael Bennett role. But he's not a good run defender at all, and ranking him as a 67 here is a projection. The depth, you have Jordan Phillips, who's a full steam ahead pass rushing nose tackle type, who's been just terrible against the run, just no discipline at all and plays upright. You have Rashard Lawrence, who is also just kind of young and full steam ahead, good get off, but no discipline, and does get bodied in the run game. They did bring in a veteran, and Xavier Williams should actually be like their second or third best run defending interior guy. He should rotate in here and help a little bit. But then you have an undersized Michael Dogby, who's kind of a hybrid defensive end. David Perry, who's a veteran here, but whatever. The interior defensive line is the reason this comes close to the worst run defense in the league. And honestly, J.J. Watt getting back now to, 3-4 defensive end. And, he's a good run defender there, but at his age, is he an elite run defender that can transcend kind of, honestly, garbage around him? I don't know. I'm definitely not convinced about that. And you got to account for J.J. Watt as a guy that can get injured from time to time. So the interior defensive line is a significant question mark from a run defense standpoint. And then the edge, it's fine. Chandler Jones, I expect to take on maybe a little bit more of a rotation here, trying to keep him healthy. Coming off the injury last year at 31 years old, I don't think he plays 800, 900 snaps, and I think they'd be smart to keep him as more of a third down player. But he is their best run defending guy. He has the length, and he does defend the run very well. It's just a matter of how much do they use him there. You've got Marcus Golden on the other end. He's fine. He has the physical traits to take a step up as a run defender, but has never graded out well against the run. Devon Kennard's a really nice kind of rotational guy there. I think he comes in and out, spots in for Golden and Chandler Jones, kind of what he did last year for this team, but he is their I don't want to say best run defending edge player, but I think he's maybe the biggest contributor for them for run defense on the edge this year, if that makes sense. Gardick is super undersized. He's kind of a speed rushing specialist. Fits more of that hybrid type, but not a guy that gets off blocks well. Victor Demukage is a powerful player. I could see him contributing in year one in a rotation on early downs, so we'll keep an eye on him. But yeah, the edge group's not really great for run defense. And then a lot of questions for linebacker with the run defense. Jordan Hicks gets bodied, simply put. And then you have Zaven Collins, who has the size to play the run. But if you watch him at Tulsa, he actually can play a little bit timid and doesn't always stick his head in there for a guy that they're hoping to do that. So I think he can exceed this, but it is a matter of seeing it first at the NFL level. And Isaiah Simmons, he looked like a free safety that was trying to learn how to play linebacker. From a run defense standpoint, that's really why he had a hard time getting on the field, was dissecting runs and getting in there and playing linebacker. It's almost impossible to say right now for sure how they're going to use all three of these guys after they drafted Zaven Collins, because they're paying Hicks a ton of money and he can still play, and they spent that top 10 pick on Isaiah Simmons. So, I think it'll be a bit of a trial by fire here with this entire defense, but especially the linebackers in general. It's a squishy run defense. I'm not going to lie, it's a concern for me as far as how well they're going to be able to stop some of these running teams in their division, like the Rams and the Niners. So probably the biggest question mark for maybe this entire team as a whole there. But the pass rush is much better. It goes to show you that you can have a great pass rushing D-line that just isn't a very good run defending group. They rank 11th. You got two huge names there with J.J. Watt and Chandler Jones. But both guys, you got to kind of put injury red flags next to. Jones coming off a significant injury last year and now getting up there in age. I think he'll be 32 when the season ends. I like Chandler Jones. I think I'd say I'm a touch lower on him than maybe Cardinals fans and some other people. I do still see him as a top 5 edge. Like, I see people saying he's a top 5 edge rusher. I'm not even sure I'd put him in the top 10 with how many good edge rushers there are, but he's still fantastic. Though, when he played last year, he wasn't all that dominant, I think he had 10 pressures and 1 sack in about 4.5 games, which is definitely below his regular clip. Now, you could have expected him to take a bump back up as the season went on, but you started to maybe see him slow down a little bit. So I don't think it's a lock that he is just this 15 sack, 70 pressure player like he was in 2019 necessarily, but he could certainly be that. It's very Von Miller-esque here with Chandler Jones in Arizona. And then J.J. Watt is another wild card here. Gets that massive contract. He is a guy that's had a hard time staying healthy out there. And just like we said with Chandler Jones, he just hasn't quite been his old, or like even more with J.J. Watt than Chandler Jones. We have more evidence of him not being an elite impact in the pass rush, but he is still, in a lot of ways, J.J. Watt. I almost think the leadership that J.J. Watt's going to bring to the table is maybe even a bigger deal than the on-field impact. And that's saying a lot because I think he's going to make a good on-field impact. But I don't think you can expect defensive player of the year J.J. Watt is really all I'm saying here. I mentioned Jordan Phillips as a good kind of bull rushing nose tackle who is a fourth option's perfectly fine, who should play a lot of pass rush downs but not so much run defense. And then Marcus Golden, Devon Kennard, they'll rotate around. Golden's actually been kind of an underrated player as well. They've done a good job getting underrated players from New York. Marcus Golden and Kelvin Beachum are significant players for this team that they got for nothing. So more great scouting there and execution by this front office. You got Dennis Gardick, who had some moments last year as a speed rusher. He'll get in there and rotate around, and that's really your edge group, I would expect. You kind of go 4 deep there. And then on the interior, I don't want to just dismiss Zach Allen. I just haven't been impressed by him at the NFL level, but I loved him as a prospect coming out of Boston College. He's a guy that had power and technique, but just hasn't had it here in Arizona. So I'd love to see it, but not expecting it. Lecky Fotu's not a pass rusher. Rashard Lawrence is also interesting. He has some of the best get-off you can find for a D tackle. He just doesn't have any idea what to do with that. So maybe they can coach him up. There's something there. It's just a matter of unlocking it. Michael Dogby is kind of a hybrid type. Maybe can get in there. So they've got some options for the depth, and it's a really good pass rush. It ranks 11th. If you get the old Chandler Jones and the old J.J. Watt, which I think it's just a stretch to expect that, this is going to be a top 5 pass rush and can really change the outlook for this entire defense. But I think it's much more realistic to expect just a good pass rush here, one of the better ones in the league, or at least top half pass rush that can help this defense do what they want to do, but probably not going to be a dominant team rushing the passer. Now let's talk a little bit more about these linebackers. So they rank 13th, and a big part of that is I just love the versatility and upside with this group. None of these guys can grade out all that well. You got Zaven Collins, who's a rookie. You got Isaiah Simmons, who's a young player who really didn't show a ton, to say the least, in his rookie year. I had a hard time actually getting on the field. But when he was out there, he showed his flashes. And then Jordan Hicks, who had a really down year last year as well, begs the question of if this scheme is correct and if this coaching staff is correct. But Hicks has been, I would just say, a quality coverage linebacker with really good tackling and sideline-to-sideline speed throughout the last 4 or 5 years. They paid him a ton of money, so he can exceed this ranking as well. I have a lot of confidence in them to get good linebacker play here. I just don't know necessarily how and where it's going to come from, whether it's Zaven Collins making that impact year 1, Isaiah Simmons taking a step up in his first offseason, his first full offseason as an actual linebacker, as a guy that was almost more of a free safety at Clemson. And then Jordan Hicks, he could easily bounce back as well. So I like the 3 options there. All 3 of them have upside. It's just a matter of where is it going to come from. But a little bit more time on Zaven Collins and Isaiah Simmons here. I liked Collins as a prospect. My comparison for him was Anthony Barr with coverage instincts. He's almost a hybrid of those 2 Vikings linebackers, which sounds amazing because if you could put Eric Kendrick's brain in Anthony Barr's body, you'd be in business. They'd be one of the best linebackers ever, if not the best. And there were times at Tulsa where that's what Zaven Collins looked like, was Eric Kendrick's in Anthony Barr's body, because he's 6'5", looks like an edge rusher, but he moves well in space. And Zaven does what I love to see from linebackers, and that is covering players, not grass, in zone coverage. Not just standing there, waving your arms, hoping the ball comes your way. No, he goes and finds work, and I really appreciate that about him. My really only knock on Zaven is the run defense aspect and diagnosing runs and playing more physical with the size he has. So I think he can and will do that at the next level. But it did show up on his scouting report that he wasn't the best thumper of a linebacker. But he also offers some flexibility with pass rushing and stuff too. So in a 3-4 scheme, they can do some creative stuff with him on the edge. And then Isaiah Simmons, I do think, really starts to cement himself as a stud in the NFL. It's just, we have to see it, man. I loved him as a prospect. I think he was one of 2 blue chip prospects for me in the 2020 class, so I really hope he works out here. But it's just impossible based on what we saw to necessarily expect that this year. So there's your linebackers. It's really about those 3. You got Tanner Vallejo, who's a decent special teamer in depth. Evan Weaver, who's just kind of a smart linebacker with a lack of physical traits. Both those guys will probably make the team. But I ranked them 13th. I do have good expectations for this team. They've got depth and upside. I just don't know necessarily where the good play is going to come from. I just feel very confident it's going to be better than what they got last year. And then the secondary, I don't hate this group, though I don't love it. I think this group maybe gets a little bit too much crap. I've seen people really make fun of the cornerbacks here and acting like there's nobody here. I don't think it's true. I think you have some decent options with Budda Baker on top, which is good enough to give you a decent secondary. They rank 19th, so it's nothing special here. But you got Malcolm Butler coming in. He should be better than anything you had last year. You know, Patrick Peterson was really rough. And you look at Malcolm Butler, who came from a similar system that ran a lot of man coverage in Tennessee for a team that couldn't get after the quarterback like the Cardinals oftentimes struggled to do last year. And Butler had a much better season than Patrick Peterson with a similar physical profile at this stage. So I like that signing. I think that was a really nice pickup by this team. And then you can't just forget about Robert Alford. Yes, he's been injured the last 2 years, but take a look in San Francisco, what happened with Jason Verrett, a player that had not been able to stay healthy, but was on the field and was a quality starter for them. Robert Alford, it's impossible to expect that, but I think it's in the realm of possibilities for him to be a quality number 2 option. I kept saying his name in the pre-draft process where people were saying they need a corner, and I was like, well, they do have Robert Alford and Byron Murphy. They have bodies here. And I love Byron Murphy. He was my number 1 corner in that draft class. Lacks the high-end speed. It seems he's going to move to a nickel corner full-time this year, and I love it. I absolutely love it. He has the quickness and ball skills and physicality to be the best nickel corner in the NFL. Now, if Alford gets hurt, you very simply move Murphy back outside where he's been serviceable and could take a step up as a decent starter out there in year 3. And then you slide in Darqueze Dennard. So you have flexibility there. Dennard's been a quality starting slot corner for a long time. He's been on multiple defenses. So you have options here. You have veterans, versatility. I don't think it's all that bad of a corner group, and certainly better than what they were working with last year. And then 2 interesting draft picks on top of that. Marco Wilson. So this pick makes so much sense because the Cardinals were up there in terms of man coverage last year. They ran about 40% man coverage last year, which is at the top. And Marco Wilson is an excellent man cover corner. I actually think if he could just play man coverage every snap, he could be like a good starter in his rookie season. It's just the mental side of things with Marco Wilson. He doesn't have necessarily those zone instincts, but I loved him as a prospect. I think it was a total steal. And he actually played in a cover 3 heavy system at Florida, which, like I said, like he doesn't have zone instincts, but he kind of has experience doing it, so he could maybe survive in it like he did at Florida. But in a man system like this, Marco Wilson, he could come in and stun and be a impact rookie like a L'Jarius Sneed last year, who had all of the physical traits in the world and just came in and the Chiefs said, yeah, you've got this guy. Go run with him. I'm really optimistic for Marco Wilson. He was one of my dudes in this draft class. Tay Gowan, a little more of a press guy with some length, decent prospect as well. So I think this cornerback group is actually quite underrated, and I think they'll be very serviceable. Not really going to talk about any of the other guys, other than I have to give a shout out to the best name in the league right now, Picasso Nelson Jr. Let's go. But the safety group here, you got Budda Baker up top. I don't know where I stand on Budda Baker, honestly. I love watching him play. He is one of the most instinctive run-defending safeties. He is just a bat out of hell coming down from the second level. His tackling ability is phenomenal. He diagnoses runs. And I could have attributed him more to the run defense, but they've been using him so much as a free safety lately. It's just almost impossible for him to be a consistent impact in run defense. He more like limits big plays and stuff with his speed and pursuit and tackling. But as a coverage player, I don't want to say he's overrated. Like, he's fine as a coverage player. He's got range and can go man-to-man. He's got instincts from the slot. But he just hasn't been a stable coverage player in the NFL. So for me to rank him as like a top 5 safety or a top 8 safety even, I'm just not quite there with Buddha, because I think the coverage aspect is so important, and he's not an elite cover corner. He's very similar to me to Tyrann Mathieu in Kansas City, who I say the same things about. So I love Buddha Baker. I'm just not maybe quite as high as some of the biggest Buddha Baker truthers, but I'm not trying to be negative about him. He's awesome, and is a big reason they ranked 19th. But then you have actually a crap ton of depth behind him. So Jalen Thompson, who I think was injured last year, right? He only played 5 games, but was a breakout rookie, a supplemental draft pick guy. He's got range and ball skills up top. Him coming back maybe allows Buddha to come back closer to the slot and be more of that strong safety. Gives them a little more flexibility. So I like Jalen Thompson. Could be a surprise year 3 player there. They get some veteran presence there in Sean Williams. Maybe just a special teamer here is more of that strong safety type. Maybe they want to go a little more like big nickel packages. So we'll see if he even makes the team. You got Chris Banjo, who played valiantly last year. He's been able to hang around and have a nice NFL career. And then you have Deontay Thompson as well, out of Alabama, who's very versatile. He can go free, strong slot corner. Not a high-end athlete, but an instinctive safety there. So that's 5 deep. They draft James Wiggins, who I see as just a special teamer early on. I was really low on James Wiggins. Some people thought this was a steal. I hated his coverage ability. I thought he was constantly out of position at Cincinnati. So they have to really coach him up, but he is a good athlete. And then you have Charles Washington, who's been around here. It's a super deep group of safeties. I think this secondary is solid. Certainly not perfect, but they do rank 19th. So you put in, sure, some questions in the secondary on top of one of the worst run defenses and a squishy defense in general. And for me, the 22nd ranked defensive coaching staff. I think Vance Joseph is fine. I don't think his scheme is like ultra creative, and I don't think they do the best job to elevate these guys. And I think you also need to have some questions on if that combination of Chandler Jones and J.J. Watt is going to be more name value or actual on-field impact. So there are certainly some question marks here. They rank 22nd on defense as a whole. The home field is smack dab in the middle there, 17th. And I think there's a couple things go right here, and this can be a 16th ranked defense. I really don't see this having upside to be like a dominant elite defense. I'm just so not convinced on the coaching and the culture and just the overall ability to put these guys in the right position to succeed. But I think a couple things can go right, and this can be a 16th ranked defense, top 10 offense potentially if a couple things go right on that side of the ball. And that's surely enough to get this team into the playoffs and beyond potentially. So just a recap of all of this before we get into the schedule and talk about my win prediction for this team. I've got them 14th for offense, 22nd for defense, with the upside to exceed both of those rankings. They're very solid on special teams. I love the Matt Prater signing to get a better kicking situation here that was suspect for them. So they rank tied for 12th in special teams. Also keep an eye on maybe Rondale Moore as a returner, being an elite guy. And then the culture is also a question mark here. If this was a better culture, this team would rank highly. But we've talked about our questions with Cliff Kingsbury. It doesn't just come down to the X's and O's with him. I really don't think this team has had an identity or continuity or, that cohesiveness as a team and leadership. I think that's all kind of lacking here in Arizona. You have some guys that bring leadership. You've got Hopkins and Kyler and now J.J. Watt and Chandler Jones. So there's, I think Vance Joseph as well is a okay motivator, but it's just not a high-end culture. I don't think that's controversial to say, and that's going to drag this team down just a little bit. And then the strengths and weaknesses, I think the playmaking ability you get at QB, we can at least say that is, in general, a strength. the combination of Kyler's feet in the designed run game, his scrambling ability, and the big play passing ability is enough for me to say that playmaking ability at quarterback is a huge upside for this team. You have receiving versatility. You've got your number one, and then you got some different skill sets, right? You got your perimeter, A.J. Green, you got Rondale Moore, Christian Kirk, some playmakers from the slot. You got a good receiving running back. So you've got a lot of versatility in the receiving game. You have really good pass protection, especially this year compared to last year, to really push the ball downfield a little more and maybe emphasize Kyler's ability to throw the ball deep down the field. I do think pass rush will be a strength. I just don't know if it'll be an elite group, so that'll help the defense. And then you have versatile linebackers. I do think that ends up being a strength. That's just, again, it's a little tough to say how they're going to use those different guys and who is going to step up there. But I feel pretty good about that group of linebackers. Then the weakness is just team identity as a whole. I think they're, on offense, they're trying to figure out, like, just in general, what kind of pass concepts work for this skill set that they have here. I think Cliff and Kyler and these receivers and all this, they're trying to figure that all out. I think it's a weakness going into the year. Run defense, it's a worry, man. They don't match up well necessarily against San Francisco and the Rams in that division, who run the ball really well. Seattle tries to run the ball too. So that's going to be an issue for them, I believe. And then a slow secondary. I talked about how it's a decent underrated group, but I mean, you don't exactly have speed there. You've got Malcolm Butler, Byron Murphy, Robert Alford. Those are all like 4 or 5 speed guys on a good day. So, certain matchups against, say, Deshaun Jackson or, say, DK Metcalf, those guys might be able to just run away from your corners. So that's an issue there too that I didn't really mention. But that's the overview of the team. Let's get into their over-under. Vegas has them at 8.5 wins, and I kind of see why. The division's tough. The schedule is tough. I do have them starting 3-2, beating Minnesota and San Francisco at home, though. So those are certainly not easy, and you can see a world where they start like 1-4 there against some really good teams and some really good run games, too, with Minnesota, San Francisco, the Rams, Tennessee. That run defense is going to get tested early on, and we will know in the first month plus that if they can stop the run. And at Cleveland, I mean, they better be practicing outside zone non-stop. That's actually crazy. You have really the 4 best outside zone, or is that 5? Tennessee, Minnesota, the Rams, San Francisco, and Cleveland. That's probably the 5 best outside zone run games in the entire NFL. So they're gonna be tested. These linebackers, those edge guys, we're going to find out if they can stop the run. Then they do get Houston at home. They better be able to win that one. But then Green Bay and San Francisco again. So it's a rough stretch. I have them stealing games against Minnesota and San Francisco, but at 4-5. Now it gets easier down the stretch. You got Carolina at home, very winnable. At Seattle, winnable. Bye week at Chicago. That's a very winnable stretch. So you can see them turning their season around and getting hot as they head into the back end there. And actually, I have them start ending the year 4-1 with a win against the Rams at home. Won't come easy, but at Detroit, Indianapolis, I could see them matching up well against. At Dallas, I do have them losing, but that's very winnable. And then Seattle at home. So, dropping a couple close, 50-50 games at Chicago, at Dallas, but they could very realistically start 3-7 or something like that. My math's probably off here, but then finishing 6-0 and ending with a 10-7 year. I have them at 9-8, right over that 8.5 wins. My gut tells me they'll get over, and we'll see where they officially come in when I do my all-in kind of preseason record predictions. But for the purposes of this series, I have them just over that over-under as a projection. But yeah, there is the deep dive. Cardinals fans, let me know what you think. Is 16 right around where you were expecting? Is this a little bit too low for you? Do you think you'll be in the playoffs? Do you think you're a Super Bowl team this year? Let me know all those things in the comments down below, as well as who you think comes next. We'll see you guys in a few days for number 15. Until then, please do hit that like button, and peace out. We'll see you then.